sports fans, and welcome to your 8th episode of Red Flags. We've got a full slate of games that I want to get through, so let's not waste any time. Got the recap. I want to talk about some waiver wire ads that you can add this week. I'm going to talk about players that it is okay to cut at this point in the season. Then I want to go ahead and give you a fantasy outlook for Sunday. Ready? Go. Okay, so first up, we've got the Arizona Cardinals versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh was triumphant, 23-13. Remember last week that I said, going into this game, I didn't like Ben Roethlisberger because he's going to be easy to game plan against. Arizona has a great defense. And Michael Vick was relatively an unknown in the Pittsburgh offense. We've had a couple of weeks to see what he can do, but, week to week, that game plan can change. And what happens? On cue, Michael Vick goes down with a hamstring injury, and insert Landry Jones. Where's the tape on him? So, if anything, it's even harder to dig up tape and game plan against a Landry Jones, especially when you don't expect him to come in the game. Came in and lit the Cardinals up. 8 for 12, 168 yards, 2 touchdowns, one being pretty much a dump off to Martavis Bryant, but Martavis Bryant did the rest. Speaking of Martavis Bryant, if you grabbed him early, stashed him, congratulations. 6 receptions, 137 yards, 2 touchdowns. Le'Veon Bell had a pretty high floor for you, but it didn't give you much beyond that. 88 yards on the ground. On the other side of the ball, Carson Palmer carved up the Pittsburgh defense for 421 yards. Just couldn't really find the end zone. Only found it one time. The Cardinals had a litany of turnovers. 2 picks, 2 fumbles, one of which being a lost one. John Brown seems to be elevating his status. 10 receptions, 196 yards. Larry Fitzgerald did what he does, 8 receptions, 93 yards. Malcolm Floyd added a touch. Sorry, not Malcolm Floyd, Michael Floyd. Shout out to Ryan Guillory. 5 receptions, 50 yards, 1 touchdown for Michael Floyd. So the Cardinals' offense had it going. It's just they couldn't get out of their own way with the turnovers, and it resulted in a loss. So who I like going forward, I like Carson Palmer. John Brown is definitely making his case for wide receiver 1 status. Larry Fitzgerald is a no-brainer. I'm not a fan of Michael Floyd because he just happens to be the 3rd receiver on that depth chart. So, it's really dicey. You can't really trust him week to week. He's really boom or bust. On Pittsburgh's side of things, Landry Jones might be a good plug-and-play next week, seeing that Ben's going to sit out another one. Got to start Le'Veon. Got to start Martavis Bryant every week. Antonio is probably going to pick up his production a little bit with a Landry Jones there, so take that moving forward. Next up, Buffalo versus Cincinnati. 34-21, Cincinnati remains undefeated. This team has so many weapons on offense. A.J. Green, Marvin Jones is boom or bust every week. Tyler Eifert is a go-to tight end. You've got Gio catching balls out of the backfield. Jeremy Hill is your power back. And what does Andy Dalton have to do except just man the ship? Wow. Andy Dalton, 243 yards, 3 touchdowns. The Buffalo defense did hold both rushers under 60 yards, which was expected. Buffalo's pretty stout against the run. Going forward, you have to start your cash cows against a Buffalo defense, but if you're on the fringe with a running back 2, running back 3, and he's going up against Buffalo defense, err on the side of caution and sit them. On the other side of things with Buffalo, E.J. Manuel didn't have such a great day. Coming in and throwing 263 yards, a touchdown and a pick. You can't ask for much more from your substitute quarterback. LaShawn McCoy came back a little early from injury, but did not disappoint. 90 yards on the ground and a touchdown. Charles Clay's continuing to impress. 9 receptions, 62 yards. Sammy Watkins also paid dividends, 4 receptions, 48 yards, and a touchdown. Now, with Buffalo moving forward, you've got injuries all over the field with the receivers. Percy Harvin, I mean, he's often in injury reports, and he looks like he's going to be on one for the foreseeable future. Sammy Watkins is also already ruled out for this week. So, who do you trust going forward? You got to think those targets are going to go somewhere. I like Charles Clay. We'll talk about 2 other players later. Since he's rolling, 6-0. This might seem like a little deja vu. We're here again. I didn't get my Denver upset, but I was damn close. Denver squeezes this one out, 26-23 against, yes, the Cleveland Browns. The Denver defense did just enough to eke out this victory. It was not on the arm of Peyton Manning, who threw for 290 yards, 1 touchdown, but 3 interceptions. Cleveland Browns normally give up a lot of rushing yards, and I mean, they didn't disappoint this game, except they gave it to the wrong person. I started C.J. Anderson thinking that, okay, Cleveland's given up 100 plus yards every game this year, with the exception of 1. C.J. Anderson has to get some yards. Oh no, there's a Ronnie Hillman. And Ronnie Hillman upstages C.J. Anderson, rushes for 111 yards, and ruins my flex position. Thanks, Ronnie. Demaryius Thomas did what Demaryius Thomas does. 10 receptions, 111 yards, PPR monster. As well as Emmanuel Sanders, 4 receptions, 109 yards, and a touchdown. You can always trust those 2 going forward. Looks like you can go ahead and plug in Ronnie Hillman because C.J. Anderson is just terrible. Maybe he's just too fat for this season. I don't like calling people fat, but C.J. Anderson's fat. Other side of things, Josh McCown, while he didn't match his previous 2 weeks' production, had a pretty decent day. 213 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. If he was a plug-and-play for you this week, I mean, he got you what you needed. Don't like Cleveland running backs because it's all by committee. 109 rushing yards divvied up by 3 different running backs. So what? You got Travis Benjamin, 9 receptions, 117 yards. Gary Barnage, 3 receptions, 39 yards, 2 touchdowns. Those seem to be emerging as Josh McCown's 2 favorite targets going forward, and I trust them. So start those 2 going forward. Peyton Manning, we'll talk about him later. Congratulations, Dan Campbell, on a job well done. 1-0 as the Miami Dolphins interim head coach. Against a pretty lackluster performance by the Tennessee Titans, 38-10. Ryan Tannehill had a pretty decent outing, 266 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. But more importantly, Lamar Miller got it going on the ground. 113 yards, 1 touchdown. This is a formula for success for Miami going forward. Rashard Matthews, I started him. 6 receptions, 85 yards. Starting to get some pretty high volume targets on the outside. Jarvis Landry, although he only caught 3 balls for 42 yards, ended up still finding the end zone somehow on a rush for 24 yards. I trust those 3 going forward for Miami: Miller, Matthews, and Landry. And I'm waiting and seeing with Tannehill. I kind of have to start him because he's my best option at quarterback right now, but he's on a short leash. On the other side of things, Marcus Mariota got knocked out of the game. Looks like he's got a sprained MCL and might sit this week. So look for a Zach Mettenberger this weekend. Delaney Walker continues to be the tight end that keeps giving. 8 receptions, 97 yards. And yes, my waiver wire pickup, Dorial Green Beckham. 2nd round pick, rookie. 6'6", 230 pounds, huge target. 3 receptions, 57 yards, but I expect his workload to increase going forward, especially with Zach Mettenberger, who's not shy at all with the ball, and Dorial Green-Beckham is a huge target. I expect the pecking order to be something like Kendall Wright, Delaney Walker, Dorial Green-Beckham. And with a running attack as weak as Tennessee has, I expect these numbers to be pretty high. Next up, we got the Carolina Panthers versus the Seattle Seahawks. Carolina being triumphant, 27-23. Cam Newton throws for 269 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks, but also rushes for 30 and another touchdown. Jonathan Stewart, as expected, could not be taken down by the Seattle defense. He's festered them in the pass, and he continues to troll them. 78 yards, 2 touchdowns. And, oh my gosh, Greg Olsen is the only receiver that you have to cover. Well, he's a tight end, but he's the only person you have to cover for the Carolina Panthers, yet still eked out 7 receptions, 131 yards, and a game-winning touchdown. It seems like we're at the same juncture again. Another fourth quarter lead blown by Seattle. Russell Wilson, decent day, 241 yards on the ground, a touchdown, and 53 yards rushing. Marshawn Lynch in his first game back from injury had 54 yards, modest, and a touchdown though. And then Jimmy Graham got things going. 8 receptions, 140 yards. But it wasn't enough. Is it the defense? I kind of have to give it to the defense on this one, because Russell puts up 23 points. That defense, as proven in the past, should be well equipped enough to hold the opponent below that total. Wow, we're here again. I mean, I kind of called this, but I mean, I'm not happy about it. I really hope that the Seahawks find their defensive swagger again, because the league isn't the same without it. So if there was ever a low-scoring shootout, it was this game. Green Bay versus San Diego. Green Bay, of course, winning, remaining undefeated, 27-20. Aaron Rodgers had a decent day, 255 yards, 2 touchdowns. James Starks outran Eddie Lacy. I don't know what's going on with Eddie Lacy. Maybe it's injury, maybe he's in Mike McCarthy's doghouse, but James Starks was the lead back in Green Bay. 112 yards and a touchdown. Where's Eddie Lacy? James Jones continues to be the man that finds the end zone. Only on 2 receptions for 30 yards, but that touchdown makes the difference. I guess you can trust him every week because of that. Randall Cobb had a fairly pedestrian game. 2 receptions, 38 yards. Wondering if that shoulder is still bothering him. On the other side of things, Phillip Rivers had a 500-yard passing game. Wow, I'm sure that got you anywhere from 50 to 60 points in your league, and you've got to be thankful. As well as 2 touchdowns. The rushing attack was almost non-existent, though. Green Bay's defense is pretty stout against the run this year, and Mr. Melvin Gordon had a pretty costly fumble, which put him in the doghouse and brought out a Brandon Oliver, who, I mean, didn't really put up much yards on the ground, but played a big part in the receiving game. I don't see that as a trend going forward. I expect Melvin Gordon to get back on the field, but what he's able to produce, not quite sure. Keenan Allen seemed like he was on pace for 20 targets until exiting in the fourth quarter with a hip injury. Hip injuries are tricky, so really pay attention to the status of Keenan Allen going forward, because he's elevated himself to wide receiver 1 status, especially with his performance, 14 receptions for 157 yards. But, like I said, hip injuries are tricky. Look at Percy Harvin. Take note. Antonio Gates isn't really wasting any time trying to get up to speed. Had 9 receptions for 95 yards. And Malcolm Floyd also added 9 receptions for 95 yards as well. So the ball was being thrown around a lot. Balls were caught by Ladarius Green, Danny Woodhead, Brandon Oliver. Rivers is not gun shy, and we know this. So going forward, you can start your San Diego skill players, because behind the arm of Phillip Rivers, they're going to produce. So the Sunday night action, Deflategate rematch, New England versus Indianapolis, 34-27, New England. Not quite the slaughter we all anticipated. Tom Brady still had a great outing, 312 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception that wasn't quite his fault, bobbled ball by Julian Edelman that ended up in the hands of a Indianapolis cornerback, ran back for a touchdown. LeGarrette Blount out-carried Dion Lewis in this game, 93 yards on the ground, 1 touchdown, also had a reception for 11 yards and a touchdown. Upset me because I had Dion Lewis pegged as the lead cow in New England, but I think his abdominal strain that they were listing on the injury report might have actually been a problem. So that was a disappointment. Danny Amendola racked up some receptions, 7 receptions, 105 yards. We had 1 Gronk spike on 3 receptions for 50 yards. And Edelman, as Edelman does, got his targets, got his receptions, 6 receptions, 50 yards, 1 touchdown. Got a little shaken up though, and maybe a broken finger. Check out the injury report on that one. Andrew Luck didn't really have such a bad day himself. 312 yards in the air, 3 touchdowns, a lot of which came in garbage time, but doesn't matter when, doesn't matter where he gets those stats from. Fantasy numbers are all the same. Frank Gore got kind of taken out of the game due to circumstance. Was on pace for a 100-yard game, but ended up with just 78 yards and 2 receptions for 16 yards. If the game is close, I expect Frank Gore to rack up yardage, even rack up receptions, and get touchdowns. But when you're starting to play from behind, then Andrew Luck's going to be forced to throw, and that kind of takes Frank out of the game. T.Y. Hilton racked up some yardage, 6 receptions, 74 yards, and a touchdown. And Dante Moncrief is also emerging as one of Andrew Luck's favorite targets, 6 receptions, 69 yards, and a touchdown. Guess that Andre Johnson thing isn't working out after all. Finally, we've got the Monday night action, Philadelphia versus the New York Giants. Philadelphia, of course, being triumphant, 27-7. I guess somebody had to win. Sam Bradford had a decent game, 280 yards and a touchdown, of course, coupled with 3 picks. I guess you have to take the good with the bad. DeMarco Murray seems to have things going on the ground, 112 yards rushing, 1 touchdown. Ryan Matthews also added 40 yards. Riley Cooper emerged from the depths, 3 receptions, 76 yards, and a touchdown. And Jordan Matthews added 6 receptions for 59 yards. You all know how I feel about Philadelphia receivers. You can't trust any one of them. Do I take any fantasy implications from this on the receiver side? Absolutely not. It's a week-to-week thing. Don't be on the bad end of things with those receivers. On the other side of the ball, we've got Eli throwing for a measly 189 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. The Giants really couldn't get anything going in this game. I mean, Rashard Jennings had 63 yards on the ground. Odell Beckham got you his numbers, kind of salvaged the day if you had him. 7 receptions, 61 yards, and a touchdown. What does this mean going forward? I think it really had to do a lot with the health of the Giants receivers. Ruben Randall's nicked up, Odell Beckham's nicked up. Haven't really found the consistency with Shane Vereen to use him as a receiver. Dwayne Harris has a case of the drops from week to week, so there weren't many options for Eli, and it didn't help that he was throwing picks. So going forward, I think you have to monitor the health of an Odell Beckham, of a Ruben Randall, and start or sit accordingly. Okay, for this next segment, I want to talk about some waiver wire additions that you can make for week 7. Whether it be you have injuries, you need a plug and play for somebody on a bye week, or your players aren't just performing up to the task. Which brings me to my first waiver wire addition, a popular addition of this week, Stephon Diggs, already drawing comparisons to the likes of an Antonio Brown. And who better than a Michael Wallace to draw those comparisons, seeing that he was cut from the Pittsburgh Steelers on the merits of an Antonio Brown. Stephon Diggs is a young, fast receiver that runs excellent routes, can get open, and these last two games has drawn 13 receptions for, I want to say, somewhere in the range of 210 to 230 yards, all in 2 weeks. And all because Charles Johnson was injured, and now because Charles Johnson is just not as good as advertised. So, in an offense that doesn't throw so often, Teddy Bridgewater does eventually have to throw the ball, especially in games where he's going to be behind. I love the addition of Stephon Diggs, especially if he is as advertised. Speaking of another receiver, a Week 1 waiver edition of mine, Tyler Lockett. Now, I added Tyler Lockett because he was going to get me some cheap punt return, kick return yardage, and in my league we have bonuses for yardage over 100 yards, and it's almost a certainty that Tyler Lockett's going to get that with the amount of times that Seattle's defense forces the team to punt. But now Russell Wilson seems to be finding Tyler Lockett downfield. Tyler Lockett can get open with relative ease. He's very fast, he's very quick, he can change directions with the best of them, and he's getting downfield. So I think Tyler Lockett is a good receiver going forward, starting to draw more targets than Jermaine Kearse, a Doug Baldwin. I mean, Jimmy Graham is the go-to tight end / receiver on that team, but Tyler Lockett is elevating himself to number 2 status, and I like that. Another popular waiver wire addition going forward, Dorial Green Beckham. It's now time for the 6'6", 230-pound, second-round pick to show us what he's got. Going into a week where Zach Mettenberger is going to be his quarterback, I like Dorial Green Beckham. He's a huge target, and Zach Mettenberger is not shy at all with the ball. And Tennessee seems to have pretty big plans for the young receiver, and he's already proven thus far that he can make big plays. Dorial Green Beckham is a good waiver addition. Another addition may not be the most popular, but if you're of my frame of mind, you like it going forward. Darren McFadden is going to be the new pass-catching back in Dallas. If you need any evidence, go ahead and look at weeks 1 through 5. Lance Dunbar stats. Caught a pretty decent amount of balls. Had some games where he caught 10 plus and over 100 yards. And then go ahead and look at week 6 at what Darren McFadden did with Brandon Whedon throwing him the ball. If you're in a PPR league, 9 receptions, 62 yards, 15.2 points, right there. So I like Darren McFadden going forward. I think with Matt Castle back there, he can get Darren McFadden the ball in some pretty decent places, maybe give him some space to run, maybe not just take advantage of having a dump off to your right side. Darren McFadden is, albeit a risky ad, but he could pay dividends going forward. We all know Darren McFadden has talent, and we've all been waiting for him to display it. No better time than now. So I'm going to couple this waiver wire addition 2 receivers. Robert Woods, Chris Hogan. With Percy Harvin down, with Sammy Watkins down, this week Tyrod Taylor needs someone to throw to. Now I expect those targets to go to Charles Clay first, but somebody else has to catch the ball. Which brings me to Robert Woods and Chris Hogan. Both have proven to be able receivers, and both are going to garner a lot of targets in this next week. So those two seem to be good waiver wire adds, maybe even decent starts this week. But do I trust them going forward into the season? No. These are definite plug-in plays. If you want to keep them on your bench, that's up to you. But I'm saying if you're going to start them, this is the week. So if Steven Jackson of the Washington Redskins continues to miss time, then Jamison Crowder is a good pickup. He's going to get many targets out of the slot coming from Kirk Cousins. I'm a little weary on this one because with the return of Jordan Reed, those targets are going to go lower, but I mean, who else is there to throw to outside of Pierre Garçon, Jordan Reed, then who? Jamison Crowder. And these last couple of weeks, Jamison Crowder has racked up receptions and he's racked up yardage. So I like Jamison Crowder until Steven Jackson comes back. So that's something to monitor. Another waiver wire add to consider, Matt Castle. Dallas has a ton of weapons at receiver, especially with Dez Bryant coming back. You got Dez, Terrence Williams, Cole Beasley, Gavin Escobar, Jason Witten, Darren McFadden out the backfield. There are a lot of weapons, so if ever there was a team fully equipped with weapons, it was Dallas. So Matt Castle, who has an able arm, who's been a starting quarterback in this league, should garner some pretty decent fantasy numbers. I'm not looking for him to wow us, but 250 yards, 2 touchdowns might get you to next week. And I like him going forward until, of course, Tony Romo returns. But I think you can do a lot worse than Matt Castle. There are some starting quarterbacks in the league right now that aren't going to throw up the same numbers that Matt Castle throws up next week. And finally, my last popular waiver wire addition, Danny Amendola. Now, under normal circumstances, you can't trust New England receivers not named Julian Edelman or Rob Gronkowski. But Amendola has slowly become a regular target of Tom Brady. Early on in Amendola's stint with New England, he really had a case of the drops. And, I mean, if you're one of Tom's receivers, Tom's going to take note and not throw you the ball. But recently, he's been catching the ball a lot. And I think going forward, he's going to garner anywhere from 5 to 7 targets a game. Last game, 7 receptions, 105 yards. So he might turn into a good plug-and-play and maybe a good wide receiver 3 to finish off the season. Also, if you're in a league that counts return yardage, Amendola does punt returns and kick returns. So this next segment I've titled as Cut List. Let's not waste any time. Let's dig in. Let's cut these players. C.J. Anderson, cut him. Had one more chance to prove to us that he had anything against a very giving Cleveland Browns defense, and he got upstaged by Ronnie Hillman. Ronnie Hillman's the new lead back. Cut C.J. Anderson. On to the next one. Darren Sproles. With DeMarco Murray finally getting things going on the ground, Ryan Matthews picking things up from the rear, Darren Sproles has been relegated to the role of backfield receiver, and you know how I feel about Philadelphia receivers. You can't trust them, especially if they're 5'6". Cut Darren Sproles. Peyton Manning. Interceptions are racking up, and the running attack is beginning to take form behind a Ronnie Hillman. Doesn't seem to be getting any better. He's going to get you less than 300 yards a game, throwing 3+ picks. There are better quarterbacks out there. Cut Peyton Manning. Which brings me to most Philadelphia receivers. There are far too many to trust any one, especially with Darren McFadden, Ryan Matthews, DeMarco Murray also catching balls out of the backfield. Sam Bradford isn't going to throw up 500 yards, so divide 250 yards amongst 10 receivers, and that's your fantasy output this week. Cut your Philadelphia receivers. Which brings me to Cleveland running backs. Cleveland running backs, Isaiah Crowell, Duke Johnson Jr., Robert Turbin, all running back by committee. Take the 100 yards that they're going to get you, divide it by 3, that's your fantasy output. Not worth it. Cut all 3. Which brings me to 2 receivers that I'm not too fond of, Michael Wallace, Charles Johnson. If you haven't already cut them, let them go. Michael Wallace knows one route, north to south. Charles Johnson is not as impressive as Stephon Diggs, and he's already moved down the depth chart with 2 good performances by Stephon Diggs. That's all it took. Cut Michael Wallace, cut Stephon Diggs. Which brings me to old man Andre Johnson. Had one revenge game in him where he put up monstrous numbers, but Andrew Luck is back. Andrew Luck likes T.Y. Hilton. Andrew Luck likes Dante Moncrief. He likes Dwayne Allen. He likes Kobe Fleener. He doesn't even know Andre Johnson's middle name. Neither do I. But unless you want to plug and play for the next Houston-Indianapolis game, I think it's safe to go ahead and cut Andre Johnson. Which finally brings me to the last receiver you can cut, Percy Harvin of the Buffalo Bills. His hip is flaring up again. Seems to be the story of his career. There were reports that he was considering retirement. There were reports that he wasn't considering retirement. Either report is not going to get him on the field. And you don't want that headache. I definitely don't want that headache. Cut Percy Harvin. So last up we have the fantasy outlook, which brings me to the Thursday night game, San Francisco versus Seattle. Seattle taking it 20-3. Russell Wilson had a decent game, 235 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 bonehead picks. Marshawn Lynch had things going on the ground though, 122 yards, 1 touchdown. Looks like beast mode is back. And if you watch the last segment, Tyler Lockett, 5 receptions, 79 yards, 1 touchdown. Welcome to the league, Rook. On the other side, Colin Kaepernick seems to continue to give this show life. 124 yards, 0 touchdowns, 6 sacks to the dome. Carlos Hyde had some decent runs, but kind of got game flowed out of the game because San Francisco fell behind early. If it's any consolation, Vernon Davis showed up, 4 receptions, 61 yards. Do I like it going forward? No, because Colin Kaepernick has to throw him the ball. Yeah. We've got Pittsburgh, Kansas City this weekend. Landry Jones at the helm. I like Pittsburgh. Got to go with the team with more weapons. Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant, Le'Veon Bell, Marcus Wheaton, Heath Miller at the tight end. And a pretty decent defense that's kind of finally taking form. Front 7's still amazing. The secondary could still use some work, but they're improving, and that's what I like. Kansas City unfortunately lost Jamal Charles a couple of weeks back. Charkandrick West hasn't really stepped up into that role. We'll see what he can do against the Pittsburgh front 7. I don't expect much. But if he can get to the edge, he might throw up some numbers. So, who do I like in this game? Got to start Le'Veon Bell. Got to start Antonio Brown. Got to start Martavis Bryant. If you want to start Landry Jones, go ahead and give it a go. If you need a quarterback this weekend, I wouldn't trust it. Kansas City side of things, I really don't like anybody. Travis Kelce, I have to start him. He's my tight end. Pittsburgh's defense has been pretty giving to tight ends, but outside of that, Jeremy Maclin's a little banged up. Should probably get the nod to start, but I don't see much coming from Kansas City in this one. Good defense, offense is spiraling out of control. Pittsburgh's going to take this one. Next up, Atlanta Falcons versus the Tennessee Titans. Slaughter for Atlanta. Tennessee's going to be down early, which is going to force them to throw. So it might be safe to start your Tennessee receivers. Dorial, Green, Beckham coming out party. Expect him to throw up some pretty big numbers. Kendall Wright's going to do what he does. Delaney Walker's going to get his numbers. Zach Mettenberger, if you need a plug and play, he's not afraid of slinging the ball. Go ahead and give him the nod. On the other side of the ball, you got Matt Ryan, who's a must start every week. Julio Jones, who's a must start every week. Devontae Freeman, who's been the best running back in football for 5 weeks. Got to give him the nod. Now, those players on the fence, you've got Leonard Hankerson, Roddy White. Do I start or do I sit? I would go with Hank. I'm still from the school of thought that says Roddy White is getting too old. So I'm going to go with the young, fresh legs of Leonard Hankerson over Roddy White. Atlanta's going to take this one. Next up, New Orleans Saints versus the Indianapolis Colts. I like the Indianapolis Colts, even though New Orleans seemed to have things clicking last week, upsetting the 5-0 Atlanta Falcons. I'm going to chalk that up more to Rob Ryan knowing his divisional opponent and having a get better game plan. Going outside of the division against the Indianapolis Colts, I think Andrew Luck finally gets his first win after coming back from injury. I like any Indianapolis Colt receiver that you have, except Andre Johnson, of course. T.Y. Hilton, Dante Moncrief, Dwayne Allen. Maybe give Kobe Fleener a look, but, if you've got anything better, go ahead and start him. I like Frank Gore as well. On the other side of the ball, New Orleans, Drew Brees is always going to throw up numbers, so he's a safe start. I think Mark Ingram has enough in the tank to get some pretty decent yardage against a pretty leaky Indianapolis rush defense who just gave up 90 yards and a touchdown to LeGarrette Blount. Receivers, Brandon Cook seems to have things going, so give him the nod. Willie Snead seems to be a popular target, and he seems like the real deal, so go ahead and give him the nod. But I do like Indianapolis to take this one. You've got the Houston Texans. I don't know why I'm wearing this. A friend gave it to me. Versus the Miami Dolphins. I've got Miami taking this one. I'm happy that they're more committed to the run. It means Lamar Miller's going to get a pretty heavy workload. Even going up against a Vincent Wilfork, J.J. Watt, Jadeveon Clowney defensive line. I gotta trust that Miami's going to stay committed to the run. They also have great weapons in the air. Rashard Matthews, Jarvis Landry, Devontae Adams, and Kenny Stills. Houston's got a good defense, but I don't see them throwing up enough numbers to compete with a Miami offense. You've got Arian Foster, who's going to give you some pretty good numbers. DeAndre Hopkins might be the best receiver out there right now as far as fantasy is concerned. Those two are always safe starts. Who's going to start at quarterback this week? I guess the latest is Brian Hoyer, but you never know. He might stub a toe, and then Ryan Mallett comes in for the next 3 weeks. Too much influx in Houston for me to trust them in any game. So I've got the Miami Dolphins taking this one. I like Rashard Matthews. Give him a start. I like Jarvis Landry. He seems to always eke out a touchdown or a lot of targets, a lot of yardage, so give him the go. Lamar Miller, he gets slowed down in this one, might not go over the century mark, but he's going to have a pretty decent workload, and he's going to get receptions out of the backfield, especially if they're coaching up Tannehill at all. So give those 3 Miami players a start, and I'm going to go ahead and start Tannehill too. All right, guys. Upset alert. New York Jets versus the New England Patriots. I've got the New York Jets taking this one. This is a new New York Jets team. There is no Rex Ryan around for the Patriots to troll. Todd Bowles has these boys playing. Ryan Fitzpatrick, who knew that he was going to be anything? The offense is clicking. You got Brandon Marshall, who's always been an elite receiver in this league. Eric Decker, who seems like a very able number 2. I think he's got a touchdown in every single game he's played. And Chris Ivory is just trotting along, having 100-yard game after 100-yard game. And we all know that the Jets have a great, great, great defense. It's time for the Patriots to be humbled. Time to let go of that undefeated status. I've got the Jets. Start Brandon Marshall, start Eric Decker, start Chris Ivory. Maybe give Ryan Fitzpatrick the go if he's on your team. Might be a good plug and play, but if you can find a better one, go ahead. On New England side, got to start Tom Brady if you have Tom Brady, but don't be surprised by a couple of turnovers. Got to start Gronkowski because, I mean, he's a matchup nightmare, and I feel like the Patriots are going to try to expose that. Whoever Darrelle Revis is covering, don't start. If it's if it's Julian Edelman, I hate to say it, put him on the bench because Darrelle Revis is going to lock down whoever he lines up against. Might even be Rob Gronkowski. Check the reports. I'm not sure. But I think it is safe to start a Dion Lewis if he's healthy, because Dion Lewis, although Jets have a good rushing defense, Dion Lewis is a game stopper. He's going to catch balls out of the backfield. He's going to make defenders miss. He's not your typical running back. So this is a game for Dion Lewis to shine. But the Jets will win. Next up, we've got Oakland, San Diego, a divisional matchup. I smell a shootout. There are so many offensive weapons on both sides. San Diego, you've got Phillip Rivers throwing 500 yards, to a Keenan Allen, Antonio Gates, Ladarius Green, Danny Woodhead, Melvin Gordon, Malcolm Floyd, shout out to Ryan Guillory. And on the other side, we've got Oakland, who has a great rookie receiver in Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper, don't disappoint me this weekend. Michael Crabtree, Michael Rivera, tight end, starting to catch a lot of balls. Latavius Murray, who has been a great back, and Marcel Reese, who's subbing in as running back, fullback, pass catcher, who knows what he is, but he's making things work with Derek Carr. In this one, I'm going to go ahead and err on the side of experience and give San Diego the win, but I'm going to like the numbers thrown up on both sides of the ball. Who to start? Keenan Allen, if that hip is okay. Antonio Gates. That's really all I'm safe with because Oakland's secondary isn't a pushover. On the other side, you can also start Danny Woodhead because he's going to catch passes. On the other side, I like Amari Cooper, I like Crabtree, I like Latavius Murray, and yes, I like Derek Carr. But San Diego wins. Next up, we've got the divisional matchup, Dallas Cowboys, New York Giants. I'm saying Dallas stops the bleeding, gets the win, with Castle at quarterback. The Dallas receivers are going to get more looks with Castle throwing the ball. Although they're probably going to stay committed to the run, with that offensive line protecting Castle, I think Castle picks apart the Giants' defense. The Giants' offense is kind of spiraling right now due to health concerns with an Odell Beckham or Ruben Randle. If they're healthy, they're must-starts. Ruben Randle, Odell Beckham. I don't like Rashard Jennings in this game. I just don't like him. But on the Dallas side, I like Terrence Williams. I like Jason Witten as the two biggest beneficiaries of Matt Castle throwing the ball. I like Joseph Randle as a running back. I like Darren McFadden in this one as a pass-catching running back. I like Matt Castle going forward until Tony Romo gets back. Eli's going to put up some numbers, but you've been disappointed by Eli in the past. Don't expect nothing great from this game. I think the Giants are going to take their second loss in a row and their second divisional loss in a row. Dallas wins. Next up, we've got the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Carolina Panthers. Carolina coming off their win against the Seattle Seahawks, and I think Carolina continues to roll. I've got Carolina winning this game. Cam's going to stay undefeated. Philadelphia, I think, is going to get stifled by the Carolina defense. They're going to stop the run, and that really cuts the head off of the snake when it comes to Philadelphia. Don't trust any of your receivers for Philadelphia. Got to start DeMarco if you have DeMarco, but like I said, I expect Philadelphia to get stifled. Carolina, I think it's safe to start a Jonathan Stewart. Got to start Cam Newton. Got to start Greg Olsen. Enough said. This brings me to our last game, the Baltimore Ravens versus the Arizona Cardinals. Man, Baltimore can't get by with only having one weapon on the ground and one weapon in the air. Justin Forsett and Steve Smith Sr. cannot bring Baltimore to the promised land. Plus, there's a lot of holes on the defense. This isn't the Baltimore team we know from the past. Joe Flacco is dealing with a lack of talent at receiver. There's no one behind a Justin Forsett to relieve him of his rushing duties. That's why he's getting all banged up. And they're meeting a juggernaut defense in the Arizona Cardinals, who are going to get turnovers. They're going to stop the run. Whoever Patrick Peterson's matched up with is going to stop him. Even though that might be Steve Smith, and I kind of like the edge Steve Smith has going up against a Patrick Peterson. I like Arizona. Arizona's going to have John Brown, who's been a matchup nightmare. So go ahead and give him the start. Got to give Larry Fitzgerald the start. Do I like any of do I like any of the Cardinals running backs? No. Not one of them. Baltimore, got to start Steve Smith, got to start Justin Forsett. But that's it. Arizona's going to roll on to a victory, 5-1. That's all for this week, sports fans. Stay tuned for the next episode of Red Flag. Make sure to gamble on that waiver wire and cut those players that aren't performing up to task. Happy trails. See you next week.